I always believed Christmas had a way of exposing the things we tried hardest to hide. Some people say the lights make everything look softer, but for me, they always made the shadows stand out a little more. Maybe that is why, on that cold Christmas Eve in British Columbia, as the snow pressed against my window like a quiet reminder of how far I was from the warmth of my own country, I felt something shifting inside me. I did not know that night would uncover a truth I had spent my whole life avoiding. A truth wrapped not in paper or ribbon, but in silence. I thought I understood the weight of family secrets. I thought the past had already taken everything it could from me. But I was wrong. Because the greatest secret of all arrived disguised as a game, a simple Secret Santa moment meant to make my grandson laugh. A small tradition my family started to help fill the empty spaces that grow when people stop talking to each other. I agreed to play because I wanted to pretend, just for a little while, that we were a normal family. A family without regrets. A family without missing pieces. For most of my life, I carried the story of a woman I never met, a woman whose existence felt more like a rumor than a memory. My father mentioned her once, then spent years acting as if she had never lived at all. I grew up believing she had chosen money over us, that she abandoned everything to chase a life of comfort somewhere far from the dusty roads of my childhood home in Latin America. I held on to that resentment as if it were a part of my identity. I carried it with me across borders, across winters, across the quiet loneliness of my small Canadian house. But the night my grandson pulled a name from a bowl, a name that none of us had written, everything I thought I knew began to crumble. That name carried a history I didn't want to face and opened a door I had spent decades keeping closed. And when the golden envelope appeared among the gifts, with handwriting I recognized from an old painful memory, I felt the cold inside the room grow sharper than the cold outside. This is not a story about money. It is not even a story about inheritance. It is a story about a wound that traveled through generations until someone finally dared to touch it. It is the story of the millionaire I never knew, until Christmas forced me to meet her. Before I continue, I would love to know something from you who is listening to this right now. Where are you watching from? Tell me your city, your country, or even where you're spending this Christmas night. And if this beginning already touched you in some way, consider subscribing, because the truth I am about to reveal changed my life forever. The first thing I remember from that Christmas Eve was the sound of the old radiator groaning in the corner of my living room, trying its best to keep the cold away. Winter in British Columbia has a way of settling into your bones, especially when you grow older and your joints begin to complain about every movement. I stood by the window, watching the pale sky dim above the pines, and I felt the familiar ache in my chest that always returned this time of year. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the memories. Or maybe it was the simple truth that no matter how many years I had lived in Canada, part of me was still that boy from a small Latin American town who believed Christmas should smell like cinnamon, roasted corn, and warm bread. Not pine, not snow, not wood smoke. But life changes you, and sometimes it changes your holidays too. I walked slowly through my small house, looking at the decorations I had placed with trembling hands earlier that afternoon. The tree stood in the corner, a modest little thing with simple lights that flickered like they were tired. I bought it at a discount years ago, and every season it seemed to shrink a little more, just like me. Still, when I plugged in the lights, the room felt warmer, almost as if the tree carried its own memory of brighter years. I touched one of the ornaments, a small wooden angel my wife carved the year before she passed. She never had much money, but she had hands that could turn sadness into beauty. I kept that angel near the top of the tree, close to the light, because I always felt she deserved to be there. As I stepped back, a wave of quiet loneliness washed over me. I knew my son Caleb and my grandson Liam were coming later for our small Christmas Eve dinner. It wasn't much, just a bit of roasted chicken, rice the way my mother taught me, and a few store-bought cookies, but the simplicity made it feel closer to home. Even so, the closer the clock moved toward their arrival, the more I felt an old, heavy pressure inside me, something like a knot I had learned to live with. It was the past, pressing itself against the present, whispering in a way only memories know how to whisper. I opened a drawer near the hallway, almost without thinking, and there it was, an old envelope, yellowed with time, its edges curled like dry leaves. I had kept it hidden for decades. Sometimes I forgot it was there. Other times, like tonight, it felt like it called for me. I picked it up, feeling the brittle texture between my fingers. I had opened it once, years ago, but I never had the courage to read what was inside. The handwriting on the front was delicate, almost elegant, the kind of writing that belongs to someone who believes in the importance of every word. The name on the envelope was one I had tried to erase from my life, Margaret Sinclair. I didn't know her. Not really. But I knew enough to hate her. Or at least, I thought I did. I set the envelope back into the drawer, closing it softly, as if afraid it might breathe. The past was a tricky thing. You could bury it, ignore it, pretend it had died, and then in a single breath, it could rise again. I felt that rising inside me already, a trembling in my chest that I tried to control. To distract myself, I walked to the kitchen and prepared the last few things for dinner. The house smelled like garlic and roasted chicken, a comforting smell, warm and familiar. It reminded me of my mother, Helen, who always cooked even when she had nothing. She would divide a single piece of chicken into 3 portions, one for her, one for my father, and one for me. She always gave me the largest piece, pretending she wasn't hungry. I didn't understand sacrifice back then. I only understood hunger. I remembered her face on the last Christmas we spent before moving away. I remembered how she kept looking at the door, expecting someone who never arrived. My father, Douglas, paced behind her like a man waiting for bad news. They spoke in hushed tones that night, thinking I couldn't hear. But I heard enough to understand there was someone missing. Someone important. Someone they didn't want to talk about. That was the first time I heard the name Margaret. I didn't know who she was, but I knew the sorrow she caused. And as a boy, sorrow is all you need to turn a stranger into a villain. A knock at the door pulled me back to the present. I wiped my hands on a cloth and hurried to open it. Caleb stood there, shaking snow from his jacket, his eyes tired the way they always were after long shifts. Behind him, Liam grinned widely, holding a small box partially wrapped in shiny paper, tape sticking out from every side. "Grandpa," he said softly, pushing the little box toward me as if offering a miracle. "We finished wrapping our gifts for Secret Santa. Don't peek yet." I smiled, though something inside me tightened. Secret Santa had become our small family tradition, something playful to balance the heaviness that sat between me and my son. We didn't talk about emotions. We didn't talk about the past. We barely talked at all. But the game, simple, silly, childlike, helped us pretend we were closer than we were. As they stepped inside, the warm air of the house wrapped around us. I watched Caleb glance at the tree, at the small decorations, at the angel. He didn't say anything, but his eyes softened just a little. Maybe he remembered his mother. Maybe he remembered the fragile pieces of our family we once tried to hold together. I didn't know then that this would be the last ordinary moment before everything changed. Before the name I had spent a lifetime resenting returned not as a wound, but as a question. Before a golden envelope would fall into our Christmas gathering like a spark landing on dry leaves. I didn't know. But the weight of memory was already shifting inside me, preparing for the truth. I have lived long enough to learn that memories do not come back in an orderly line. They arrive like sudden winds, brushing against your skin before you even realize where they came from. That night, after Caleb and Liam settled in, after the food was warming in the oven and the quiet murmur of small talk filled the house, my mind drifted back to the Christmases of my childhood. The cold outside was nothing compared to the cold I once carried inside me, the kind that sits behind your ribs and refuses to leave. I grew up far from here, in a small Latin American town where the streets were dusty and the nights were filled with the smell of burning wood. Christmas didn't look like the holiday cards people send here. There was no snow, no pine trees standing proudly in the living room, no chimney glowing with fire. Instead, there were paper lanterns hanging from wires, children running barefoot at night, and the warm scent of spices drifting through open windows. But even with all that warmth, there were years when it felt like the coldest place on earth. One Christmas stands out more than the others. I must have been 9 or 10. My mother, Helen, had worked late into the evening, preparing the little she could for our supper. My father, Douglas, came home frustrated, carrying the weight of unpaid bills on his shoulders. I remember his boots leaving marks on the floor and the tension that followed him like a shadow. The room felt too small for all his anger, too fragile for my mother's silence. That night, there was no feast. No laughter. No music. Just a small loaf of bread and 2 mugs of warm tea. My mother tore the bread into pieces, placing the largest in front of me. I can still see her hands trembling slightly, as if she were trying to hide how little she had eaten that day. My father didn't sit right away. He kept pacing, muttering things under his breath, words about failure, about disappointment, about someone who should have helped but didn't. My mother finally whispered something to him. Something I couldn't hear, but I saw the way his jaw tightened. I saw the way his hands curled into fists. And then I heard it, the first time I ever heard the name Margaret spoken with bitterness. My father said she had chosen her own life, her own comfort, and left the rest of us to suffer. He said she was selfish. He said she had turned her back on the family. My mother didn't argue, but the sadness in her eyes told me she didn't fully agree. As a child, I didn't need details. I didn't need explanations. I only knew that if this mysterious woman had stayed, maybe we wouldn't be hungry. Maybe my father wouldn't be angry. Maybe my mother wouldn't cry quietly after she thought I had fallen asleep. And so I learned to blame someone I had never seen, someone whose face I couldn't imagine. I grew up believing that pain had a name, and that name was Margaret. That belief followed me long after we left our country. My mother always wanted a better life for me, and when the opportunity came to move to Canada, she convinced my father to try. I remember the long flight, the cold air biting my skin the moment we stepped outside the airport, the overwhelming feeling of being somewhere completely unfamiliar. My parents didn't adapt well. The language felt heavy on their tongues, the winters too long, the jobs too scarce. They missed home, missed the simplicity of warm nights and familiar faces. I missed nothing and everything at the same time. The first Christmas we spent in Canada felt even colder than the winters here. We had no friends, no money for gifts, no traditions to lean on. My mother cried again, quietly, in the kitchen. My father blamed the world, blamed fate, and blamed Margaret all over again. And I listened, absorbing each word like a sponge, letting them shape my understanding of loyalty, love, and abandonment. Looking back now, I see how my father's voice became my own, echoing through the years in ways I didn't even notice. As Caleb sat in my living room that night, scrolling on his phone with tired eyes, I wondered how much of my father lived in me. I wondered when I had become a man who held too much inside, who spoke too little, who allowed silence to rot the edges of relationships. Caleb never said it directly, but I felt the distance between us like a long, thin crack in the ice. Liam, on the other hand, bounced through the room with a brightness I had never known in childhood. He had no idea that his laughter was strong enough to fill spaces that had been empty for decades. The smell of roasted chicken drifted through the house again, warm and calming. Liam took one of the cookies from the plate and sat beside me, his small shoulder pressing gently against my arm. I felt a tenderness I didn't often allow myself to feel. For a moment, the memories softened, losing their sharp edges. I looked at the boy and wondered if this Christmas would be one he remembered with warmth or with the same ache that haunted my own childhood. But no matter how hard I tried, the past kept returning. The whispers. The arguments. The emptiness. The belief that one person's choice had broken something in our family forever. I didn't know then how wrong I was. I didn't know the truth waiting quietly behind the door of Christmas night. But the past had begun to stir, and its footsteps were growing louder. The table was set long before Caleb and Liam arrived, even though it was a small table that barely had space for the three of us. I placed 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 glasses, and yet the room felt full of chairs that no one would ever sit in again. Chairs for my mother and father. For my wife. For the versions de nos mesmos que dia existrum e depois e perderam no tempo. That's the strange thing about Christmas, even when the house is small, the ghosts find space to sit. Liam sat across from me, his eyes bright, swinging his legs under the table the way children do when their bodies don't know how to hold still. Caleb sat beside him, tired but trying to look present, as if he knew I could sense every inch of distance between us. I wished I could bridge that space, but I had never learned how. My father didn't teach me tenderness. My mother tried, but some lessons drown under the noise of louder voices. And now here I was, an old man trying to learn what I should have known decades ago. We ate quietly at first. Liam filled the silence with small stories from school, simple details about drawings he made, friends he liked, snowball fights he had won. His voice warmed the room more than the radiator ever could. Caleb nodded, listening, forcing a smile every now and then. I watched them both, feeling something bittersweet settle inside me. I loved them more than I had ever said out loud. More than I had ever known how to show. After we finished eating, Liam clapped his hands and announced it was time for Secret Santa. He had been waiting all night for that moment, the way I once waited for fireworks in my childhood town. He ran to the small bowl on the counter where we had placed the folded papers earlier. 3 names. 3 people. A silly game, but one that gave the night a softness it rarely had between us. He brought the bowl to the table and placed it in front of me. I hesitated. Something inside me whispered that the night was shifting, that the air had grown heavier. But I ignored it. I told myself I was being dramatic, sentimental, old. It was just a game. I reached into the bowl and felt the papers brushing against my fingers. I chose one, placed it aside without opening it, and passed the bowl to Caleb. He did the same, though with far less enthusiasm. When Liam finally reached for his slip of paper, he giggled, shaking it before even opening it, as if the excitement alone was the gift. Then something strange happened. A 4th piece of paper slipped from the bowl and floated onto the table. Caleb frowned. "Grandpa, did you?" He began, but I shook my head before he finished. I had counted them earlier. There were only 3. Liam leaned forward, his small fingers touching the 4th paper with curiosity. He said it looked older, like it had been folded for a long time. I felt a cold shiver run through me. The bowl had been empty when I set it out. Completely empty. Liam opened his paper first. He smiled, then paused, his eyebrows lifting. "This name wasn't Daddy or Grandpa," he said softly. "He showed it to us." Margaret Sinclair. My heart thudded once, deep enough to make me grip the edge of the table. Caleb stared at the paper, confused. "Who's that?" he asked, but I couldn't answer. Liam didn't understand why the room suddenly felt different, why Caleb had stopped smiling, why my breath had become shallow. Then he reached for the fourth paper, the stray one that hadn't belonged in the bowl. He opened it slowly, dramatic as only a child could be. His eyes widened again. "The same name," he whispered. For a moment, none of us spoke. The radiator clicked. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, snow tapped against the window like a knuckle waiting to be let in. Caleb asked again, firmer this time, "Dad, who is Margaret?" I swallowed hard, fighting the memories rising like smoke inside my chest. I had heard that name every Christmas of my childhood, every argument between my parents, every whispered regret. I had carried it with me like a stone pressed into the heart. Yet I had never once spoken it to my son. Before I could answer, Liam reached under the small pile of gifts beside the tree and held up an envelope, a golden envelope addressed in handwriting I recognized instantly, even though I had not seen it for decades. The name written on it shimmered under the lights. To Henry Thompson. From Margaret Sinclair. My blood ran cold. My fingers trembled as I touched the envelope's surface. The room around me felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were listening. I wanted to say it was a joke, that someone was playing a trick, but the truth sat heavy in my bones. I knew this handwriting. I knew it from a letter I had once opened but never read. A letter I had buried in a drawer like a wound. Liam smiled, unaware of the storm he had just opened. "Looks like Grandpa has a mystery gift," he said playfully. He thought it was exciting. But Caleb looked at me with fear. Real fear. As if he realized this wasn't just a surprise, this was the beginning of something none of us were prepared for. I felt the past rising. I felt the truth pressing against the thin walls of the present. I wasn't ready. But Christmas never asks if you're ready. Before I continue, if you're still here listening to this unfolding story, tell me something. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? And if this moment made your heart tighten the way mine did, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next part, because what happened after this envelope changed everything I thought I knew. I held the golden envelope as if it were something fragile, something that might dissolve if I breathed too hard. The paper felt warm in my hand, warmer than the air around us, and that alone unsettled me. I had spent most of my life trying to forget the name written on its surface, yet there it was again, bold and elegant, untouched by time, Margaret Sinclair. I could almost hear the way my father used to spit that name, sharp and bitter, as if saying it out loud could poison the room. And now it was sitting in my living room on Christmas Eve, brought not by ghosts or memories, but by my grandson's innocent hands. Liam leaned closer, waiting for me to open it, his eyes wide with excitement. He thought it was part of the game, some twist I had planned to surprise him. Children have a way of believing the world rearranges itself just to entertain them. I wished it were that simple. Caleb watched me too, but with a different expression, something like suspicion mixed with worry. He wanted answers, but he didn't know the questions yet. I sat down slowly, the envelope trembling slightly between my fingers. The lights on the Christmas tree flickered against the golden surface, making the name shimmer. For a moment, I thought of letting the envelope fall back into the pile of gifts, pretending it had never appeared. But the truth is that some things refuse to stay buried. They find their way back to you, no matter how deeply you dig the hole. I slid a finger under the flap and opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded document, cream-colored, thick, the kind of paper used for official matters. I pulled it out carefully. At first glance, I thought it was a letter, but as I unfolded it, I realized it wasn't a letter at all. It was a will. Not the full document, but a certified excerpt, stamped and signed. And under the section labeled Bequests, I saw my name. Henry Thompson. My full name, written correctly, spelled correctly, as if someone had spoken it often enough to remember every letter. My breath caught in my throat. Caleb stood up, stepping closer. "Dad, what is that?" he asked softly. I tried to speak, but the words tangled inside me. I pointed to the name beside mine, the name of the woman I had resented all my life. Liam, still oblivious to the weight of this moment, whispered that it looked like something from a treasure hunt. In a way, it was. But the treasure wasn't gold. It was truth, and truth can be heavier than any metal. I turned the page over, expecting more documents, but something else slipped out, a smaller paper, folded tightly. Not printed. Not official. Handwritten. My heart stumbled inside my chest. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was the same handwriting on the old envelope I had hidden in my drawer for years. The same handwriting my father had refused to see, that my mother had held with trembling hands. The same handwriting belonging to the woman whose name echoed through my childhood like a curse. Margaret. I didn't open the letter. Not yet. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly. Instead, I stared at the words on the will again. A portion of her estate was left to me. A woman who had never met me. A woman my father despised. A woman who, according to every story I had heard, had abandoned us with cold indifference. Why would she leave anything to me? Caleb's voice broke through the silence. "Dad, you need to tell me what's going on. Who is she? Why is your name in a will?" I closed my eyes for a moment. The memories rose behind them like smoke, my mother's tired eyes on Christmas night, my father's angry voice, the whispers about someone who should have stayed but didn't. For decades, I had believed my father's version of the story. Now, a stranger's handwriting was asking me to reconsider everything. I said her name out loud for the first time in years. Margaret Sinclair. The sound felt strange in my mouth, almost foreign. Liam repeated it softly, as if testing it. Caleb frowned, waiting. I told them only what I knew, almost nothing. She was someone from my past. Someone connected to our family. Someone my father never forgave. And someone I was taught to hate before I even understood the meaning of the word. Caleb sat back down, running a hand through his hair. "Why would she leave you anything?" he asked again. There must be a reason. There was. I could feel it. It was sitting inside the smaller folded letter on my lap, waiting to be revealed. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. The wound that name carried was too old, too deep. Liam was the one who broke the tension. Maybe she was lonely, he said simply. Maybe she wanted to give Grandpa a present because nobody else did. His innocence pierced something inside me. I wished life were that kind. I wished people were that simple. But the truth was heavy, and it had waited too long to be ignored. I stood up, pacing slowly around the living room. The cold from outside pressed through the windows as if listening. The Christmas lights blinked softly. The air felt thick with expectation. I realized then that the arrival of this envelope, this will, this letter, was not random. Someone had put it in our secret Santa bowl. Someone had planned for me to find it tonight, on Christmas Eve, when the world slows down just enough for old wounds to breathe. But who? And why now? The thought made my skin prickle. I looked around the room, as if expecting another envelope to appear. Nothing else moved. I returned to my chair, holding the unopened letter in my hand. I knew it held the truth. The reasons. The explanations my father never gave me. The answers I had feared my whole life. But I also knew something else. Once I opened that letter, nothing would ever be the same again. And that was the exact moment when I felt the past reaching out its hand, pulling me toward a revelation I wasn't sure I was strong enough to face. I sat there holding the letter, its weight small in my hands but enormous in my chest. The room felt muted, as if even the air had paused to watch what I would do next. I didn't open it yet. Something inside me resisted, something old and stubborn, shaped by years of silence. I had built my whole life around the version of the story my father left me. If this letter contradicted that version even a little, then everything I remembered could unravel. And unraveling hurts, no matter how old you are. Caleb watched me carefully, as if afraid I might break. I don't blame him. I probably looked like I was falling apart. Liam, small and bright, leaned forward with the kind of excitement only a child could have when a mystery sits in front of him. But the truth was anything but exciting. It felt like standing at the edge of a deep well and realizing you had no rope. I finally placed the letter on the coffee table and forced myself to breathe. Instead, I focused on the document, the excerpt of the will, trying to understand something that refused to make sense. Margaret Sinclair, a woman I had never met, a woman whose name I grew up hating, had left me something in her will. Not a sentimental keepsake, not a symbolic gesture, but a portion of her estate. The excerpt didn't show numbers, but the words "considerable assets" were printed right there in black ink. "Dad," Caleb said softly, "this can't be random." He was right. It wasn't random. Somewhere in my past, in the shadows of my childhood, in the unspoken corners of our family, there was a reason. And now that reason was pushing itself into the center of our Christmas Eve. I looked at the name again, printed clearly, as if she had spoken it to someone moments before signing. I tried to picture her. I couldn't. Not even a silhouette. She had always been a ghost with a name. A ghost my father cursed. A ghost my mother mourned quietly. I remembered hearing their arguments when I was small. My father pacing the dirt floor of our kitchen, muttering that she chose money, that she turned her back on us. My mother always softer, whispering that things weren't as simple as that pain had two sides, not just one. But children don't understand nuance, they understand who is angry and who is sad. So I chose a side without knowing it. Now, years later, a gold envelope had appeared in my grandson's hands like a message sent across decades. It was Liam who broke the silence again. "Grandpa, maybe she was trying to talk to you. Maybe she wanted to tell you something but didn't know how." The words were innocent, but they pierced straight through me. Because somewhere inside, I knew he was right. This letter wasn't just information. It was a voice. A voice that had been waiting too long. Before I could bring myself to open it, a smaller card slipped from between the sheets of the will. It must have been stuck there. I unfolded it. It wasn't from Margaret. It was from the executor of her estate, typed, formal, cold. It explained that Margaret Sinclair had passed away quietly 3 months earlier. No living children. No spouse. Very few friends. She had left specific instructions that certain letters be delivered personally to their intended recipients. This one, to me, had been delayed due to complications, the note said. But it was to be delivered before or on Christmas Eve, if possible. Christmas Eve. Not the day before. Not the week before. Tonight. Something inside me trembled. She had chosen this night, long before she died. She had chosen the night when the past weighs the most. The night when families gather and remember those who didn't show up. The night when forgiveness feels closer than usual. Caleb read the card over my shoulder. "She really meant for this to reach you today," he said, and for a moment his voice softened, the distance between us shrinking. I nodded. I could feel the walls of my old beliefs starting to crack. My father had painted her as selfish, heartless, greedy. But what selfish person writes letters they know they will never read in return? What cold person waits decades for the right moment to speak? Caleb sat back down, and I saw something flicker across his face, fear, maybe, or uncertainty. Not about Margaret, but about me. He was seeing the cracks too. I picked up the letter again, and for a moment, I felt my mother's presence, her hands guiding mine the way she used to guide me through crowded markets or dark hallways. She had always whispered that pain had two sides. Maybe she had been trying to tell me all along that the version I believed wasn't complete. I pressed the edge of the letter between my fingers. "I don't know what's inside," I whispered. "But whatever it is, it's going to change things." "Then let's see," Caleb said quietly. Not demanding. Not impatient. Just present. More present than he had been with me in years. But I couldn't open it yet. Instead, I turned my eyes to the window. Snow was falling again, soft and quiet. The kind of snow that makes everything look forgiven for a little while. I wondered if Margaret had ever stood at a window like this, somewhere in this same country, watching snow fall and thinking about us, thinking about me, the child she left behind, the child who grew up filling her absence with anger. Maybe she was more than the villain of my father's stories. Maybe she was more than a name whispered with resentment. Maybe she was human, broken, flawed, full of secrets, just like the rest of us. And maybe, after all these years, she was still trying to speak. I closed my eyes. "I'll open it soon," I said. "I just need a moment." And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt the shape of her story pressing gently against mine, asking to be heard. It took me longer than it should have to finally open the letter. My hands weren't shaking because of age, they were shaking because some part of me knew the moment I broke the seal, I would never again be the same man I had been for more than 60 years. I had lived my life believing a single story, one told to me by someone I trusted more than anyone, my father. And now, on this quiet Christmas Eve, with snow stacked against the windows and my grandson curled on the couch waiting to hear what was inside, I was about to learn whether that story was built on truth, or on pain disguised as truth. I slipped a finger under the edge of the paper and lifted the flap. The sound was soft, but it felt louder than it should have, like a line being drawn through the past. When I pulled the letter out, I could see the handwriting elegant, steady, and unmistakably feminine. It wasn't the writing of someone rushing or unsure. It was the writing of someone who had carried words for a long time and finally found the courage to lay them down. I unfolded the paper slowly, feeling its weight, its delicacy. I hadn't even read a word yet, and still my throat tightened. Caleb sat across from me, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. Liam rested his chin on the back of the couch, eyes wide, sensing that something important was about to happen even if he didn't understand what. I began reading. "Henry," it started, simple and intimate, as if she had spoken my name 1,000 times before writing it. "If this letter has found you, then my time has already passed, and I will not be able to tell you these things in person. I wish I could. I wish many things had been different." I paused. The words blurred for a second before settling again. She continued, describing a young girl herself who grew up in the same small town I did, in the same narrow streets and dusty afternoons, long before I was born. She said she had been the oldest daughter in the family, expected to take care of everyone else, expected to give up her dreams. But she hadn't. She had wanted more. A scholarship arrived, an opportunity to study far away, something unheard of for a girl in those days. She wrote that leaving broke her heart, but staying would have broken her spirit. My father, her younger brother, had not forgiven her for choosing freedom. My chest tightened. Margaret was my aunt. Not a distant relative. Not a stranger in our bloodline. My aunt. The missing piece of our family. I felt the room tilt for a moment. Caleb stared at me, searching my face for something: recognition, clarity, pain. I didn't know which one he found. I kept reading. She wrote that she tried to stay in contact. Letters, money, invitations. She tried to send help when my parents struggled, but every attempt was blocked. My father sent her letters back unopened or tore them before my mother could read them. He told the neighbors she had abandoned the family. Told everyone she had chosen wealth over love. Told me, when I was old enough, that she had never cared for us. But her letter said something different. I never abandoned you, she wrote. I never stopped loving the family I left behind. I left because I believed I could build something better for all of us. And I tried, Henry. I truly tried. But your father's anger was stronger than my letters, stronger than my efforts. He closed the door between us, and I didn't know how to open it without hurting the family further. My father's face flashed in my mind, stern and silent, the weight he always carried in his shoulders. I realized then that some of his anger hadn't come from the present, it had come from the past, from wounds he never healed. Margaret explained how she built a life in Canada, starting with nothing, working jobs that paid in coins, sleeping in rooms colder than she had ever known. But she never forgot our family. She wrote my mother's name with tenderness, as if remembering her was remembering warmth. She described me as a baby she had never met but imagined often. I used to picture holding you, the letter said. I wondered if you had your mother's eyes or your father's serious brow. I wondered if you knew you were loved, even from a distance. Something cracked inside me, something hard and old. I had grown up believing the opposite, believing she had turned away from us without a second thought, believing she lived her rich life while we scraped for scraps. But the truth was nothing like the stories I had been told. She then wrote of her illness, how she knew the end was near, how she made peace with the life she built and the life she lost. She wrote that her greatest regret was not seeing me, not holding the boy she left behind, not speaking the truth before it was too late. Near the end of the letter, she wrote, "If you are reading this, I want you to know that my story is not the one your father taught you. I hope you will allow space in your heart to hold both sides of the truth, the pain of what happened and the love that never stopped reaching for you. This inheritance is not payment. It is a bridge. A chance to mend what was broken, even if I cannot see it happen." My hands trembled as I lowered the letter. The room was quiet, heavy, suspended in a gravity I couldn't escape. So she wasn't some rich stranger, Caleb whispered. She was family. I nodded. The truth felt sharp and soft at the same time. It rewrote everything I thought I knew about my childhood, about my father, about myself. She didn't leave us, I said slowly. She was pushed away. The words tasted foreign. Painful. But right. Liam climbed into my lap gently, as if sensing something fragile in me. "Grandpa," he said, "she sounds like she loved you." I closed my eyes. For the first time in decades, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, he was right. The room felt colder after I finished reading Margaret's letter, as if the truth inside it had opened a window to a winter I wasn't prepared for. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The Christmas lights blinked softly on the tree, casting tiny shadows on the walls, and each shadow felt like a piece of my childhood shifting into a new shape. I stared at the letter in my hands, reading her final words again and again, trying to let them settle, trying to understand how a life could be rewritten so completely in just a few paragraphs. Caleb broke the silence first. "Dad, he didn't tell you any of this?" His voice wasn't accusing, just stunned, like someone watching a house they thought was sturdy suddenly collapse inward. I shook my head slowly. He hated her. That's what I grew up believing. That she abandoned us for money. That she chose her life over ours. My throat tightened. But he never told me she tried to come back. Never told me she reached out. Never told me he refused her. My father's face flooded my mind, stern, proud, carved from the hardness of surviving things that should have broken him. I remembered the way he walked, always a little ahead of us, as if pulling the family forward by sheer force. He had been a man built from duty and wounded pride. But pride, I realized now, can rot a person from the inside without them ever noticing. I sank deeper into the chair. I was angry at her for decades. But maybe the anger belonged somewhere else. Caleb watched me carefully. "Do you think he did it to protect you?" I wished I could say yes. I wished I could paint my father as a man who acted out of love, not bitterness. But the truth pressed against me like a cold hand. "I think," I said slowly, "that he couldn't bear the idea of being left behind." And instead of facing that pain, he turned it into a story where she was the villain and he was the one holding everything together. Liam, sitting cross-legged on the floor now, asked softly, "Grandpa, was he wrong?" Children ask questions adults spend their whole lives avoiding. His words cut clean through the air. I closed my eyes. "He was hurt," I said. "But yes, he was wrong." And then, unexpectedly, another realization struck me, sharp and unforgiving. I had done the same thing. Not with Margaret. With Caleb. How many times had I hidden behind silence instead of telling my son I loved him? How many times had I let pride stop me from apologizing when I was wrong? How many times had I let the wounds of my childhood shape the man I became, cold in moments when warmth was needed, distant in moments that begged closeness? My father's habits had lived inside me longer than I ever admitted. I looked at Caleb, then really looked at him. The tiredness in his eyes wasn't just from work. It was from years of trying to understand a father who held himself together with walls instead of words. "Caleb," I said quietly, "I'm sorry." He blinked, caught off guard. "For what?" "For being like him. For making you carry things you shouldn't have carried." My voice cracked. I thought I was doing my best. But maybe I was just repeating what I knew. He didn't speak right away. His jaw tightened slightly, the way it did when he tried to hide emotion. For a moment, I thought he might look away. But then he exhaled, long and slow, and his shoulders eased. "I wasn't always fair either," he admitted. "I pulled away because, well, you felt far even when you were right there." We both sat in that raw truth, letting it settle between us, not as a wall, but as a bridge. The past wasn't done with me yet, though. Margaret's words echoed again, "I hope you allow space in your heart to hold both sides of the truth." Both sides. My father was not a monster. But he wasn't the hero of the story either. He was a wounded man who made choices that hurt others, and I had inherited those wounds like an old coat passed down without asking. But now I had a choice to either keep wearing it or finally put it down. I should have asked more questions, I said. I should have looked beyond his anger. Caleb nodded gently. You didn't know how. And now you're trying. That matters. Liam crawled closer, placing his small hand on my knee. We're still here, Grandpa, he said in that innocent voice that could heal almost anything. You didn't lose us. That simple sentence pierced me deeper than Margaret's letter. I hadn't lost them. Not yet. A warmth rose in my chest, pain and gratitude tangled together. I reached for Liam's hand, holding it gently. Then Caleb pointed to the envelope again. What are you going to do about her inheritance? About all of this? I stared at the documents, at the elegant handwriting, at the truth I had spent my entire life running from. I don't know, I admitted. But I do know this. I won't let her story die again. Not in silence. Not because of fear. It was strange, after a lifetime of resenting a ghost, I suddenly felt her presence as something tender, familiar, almost familial. Margaret wasn't a villain, and she wasn't a myth. She was a woman who had tried to build a bridge across a canyon my father kept widening. She was a woman who had hoped, even at the end of her life, that I might one day see her not as the cause of our suffering, but as another victim of the same wound. As I sat with that realization, something inside me shifted. The bitterness I had carried for decades loosened its grip, falling away like snow sliding off a roof. Pain didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became something I could finally hold without bleeding. For the first time since the envelope appeared, I felt ready to move forward. But I also knew that the next step, the next chapter, would demand more courage than anything I had faced so far. Because discovering the truth was one thing. Living differently because of it was another. For a long time after Margaret's letter settled onto the table, we didn't speak. There are moments when silence feels heavy, but there are also moments when silence becomes the only thing strong enough to hold all the pieces of what has just broken open. This silence was the second kind. It didn't press against us, it wrapped around us gently, giving us room to breathe, to absorb, to understand. I sat back in my chair and let my eyes drift around the room. The Christmas lights glowed softly on the tree, casting warm reflections on the ornaments, on the small wooden angel my wife had carved, on the faces of my son and grandson. For the first time that night, I saw something different in those faces, something fragile, something hopeful. Maybe they saw something different in mine too. Margaret's words echoed inside me like a soft drumbeat. This inheritance is a bridge. I traced the edge of the letter with my finger and felt an ache rise in my chest, not sharp, not bitter, but like a warmth breaking through a long winter. She had wanted healing. She had wanted connection. She had wanted her story to be known. And there I was, decades older than she ever expected me to be, finally hearing her. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Dad, what do you want to do now? His voice wasn't demanding. It wasn't confused. It was open in a way I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager. The anger he used to carry, the distance that had grown between us, seemed smaller now, like frost melting under a soft sun. What did I want to do? The question felt heavy and light at the same time. I looked at Liam first. Children don't hide their emotions, they don't know how. His face was filled with a softness, a kind of unconditional belief in me that I didn't think I deserved. His small hand still rested on my knee from earlier, and I covered it with mine. That tiny gesture, that warmth, reminded me of something important. I still had time. Time to do what my father never did. Time to break the cycle instead of carrying it further. I began slowly, I want to make something good out of this. Not because of money, but because of the truth she left behind." Caleb nodded. "And what does that mean?" I took a deep breath. "It means we don't keep living in the shadows of old wounds. Not mine, not my father's. It means we use what she gave to repair what was broken, in whatever way we can." The words came out softer than I expected. But they felt right. Liam climbed up beside me on the chair, and I wrapped an arm around him. He smelled like cinnamon and the faint sweetness of the cookies he had eaten earlier. It reminded me of my childhood, of my mother baking on evenings when she had nothing else to offer but love. I wondered what she would think of this moment of her son finally understanding a piece of the truth she never had the courage to say out loud. "I want to help people," I continued, surprising myself. "Families who are struggling. People who feel alone during Christmas. People who remind me of where we came from." I paused. "People like us." Caleb's eyes softened. "Dad, that sounds like something Mom would have loved." Hearing him mention her felt like someone touched a bruise I didn't realize was still tender, but it also warmed me. My wife had always been the quiet heart of our home, the one who kept us gentle even during hard years. She would have understood Margaret long before I did. "And you?" Caleb asked. "What will you do for yourself?" I didn't have an answer at first. It had been so long since I thought about myself outside of survival, outside of responsibility. But then something unexpected rose in me, a small spark of desire. "I want to let go," I said. "Of resentment. Of anger. Of the version of the story I carried for too long." I placed the letter gently on my lap. "I want to finally forgive her." Caleb's expression wavered, then softened into something like respect. For a moment, he looked at me the way a son looks at a father he's finally beginning to understand. It was Liam who gave the night its turning point. He slid off the chair, grabbed one of the leftover cookies, and said with all the seriousness a child can muster, "Grandpa, maybe she wanted you to have a family again." The innocence of those words struck me harder than any truth in the letter. A family again. Not just people in the same room. Not just names linked by blood. But a family, a place of forgiveness, of learning, of warmth. A place my father never gave us. A place I hadn't known how to give Caleb. But standing there, holding Margaret's letter, watching the faces of the two people who mattered most to me, I felt something inside me shift. Maybe this inheritance wasn't about wealth at all. Maybe it was an invitation. We spent the next hour talking, not with caution, not with guardedness, but with honesty. Caleb asked questions about my childhood, questions I had avoided for years. I answered them, not with bitterness or blame, but with a clarity I didn't know I possessed. Liam listened, sometimes with wide eyes, sometimes leaning against his father when the stories grew heavy. And somewhere in the middle of all that talking, all that truth, we began to heal. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But genuinely. The gift Margaret left me, the true gift, was not the money or the letter or the connection to a past I never understood. It was the chance to rewrite the ending of our own story. As the night grew deeper and the last of the snow settled softly outside, I made a silent promise to myself, I would not waste this second chance. I would not let silence be the language of our family anymore. I would not hold on to wounds that weren't mine to keep. Because some gifts, the rarest ones, don't come wrapped in paper. They come wrapped in truth. And truth, when finally faced, can warm even the coldest of Christmas nights. A week after that Christmas Eve, with the snow still thick on the rooftops and the roads painted in white silence, I made the decision to go. I didn't tell anyone at first. The thought felt too fragile to speak out loud, as if sharing it might break whatever courage I was trying to hold together. But on the morning I was supposed to leave, Caleb saw the overnight bag near the door and understood immediately. "You're going to see her," he said softly. I nodded. "I think I have to." He didn't ask why. He didn't warn me about the cold or the long drive to the town where Margaret was buried. He simply placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Then you should go." Those 4 words meant more than I could explain. They told me he trusted me. They told me our distance was shrinking. They told me we were finally learning how to be father and son again. I drove alone, through miles of frozen road, past fields that looked like untouched sheets of paper, past pine forests heavy with snow. The deeper I went, the more I felt something loosening inside me, as if each mile peeled away a layer of old anger, old wounds, old stories. For most of my life, Margaret had been a ghost I tried to avoid. Now I was chasing her, not out of hatred, but out of longing. Longing to know her, longing to understand her, longing to meet the truth face to face. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking a frozen lake. The wind there was sharp, but it wasn't cruel. It felt like a wind that carried stories, that whispered the names of the people resting beneath the snow. I walked slowly along the narrow path, the crunch of ice under my boots reminding me of every winter I had spent far from home, far from the warmth I left behind when I crossed borders and oceans to build a life here. Her gravestone was simple. No extravagant monument, no sign of her wealth. Just her name, her dates, and a small etched line that said, "She lived fully. She loved quietly." Those words struck me harder than the cold. Loved quietly. That was a kind of love I had never learned, a love that expresses itself without demanding recognition. I knelt in the snow, brushing frost from the base of the stone. My breath fogged the air in front of me. I expected to feel anger, or resentment, or the weight of all those lost years. Instead, what I felt was something closer to sadness, soft, deep, and familiar, like the sadness you feel when you realize you misjudged someone your entire life. "I wish I had known you," I whispered. The words came out uneven, like they had been stuck inside me for decades. I wish I had asked questions when I was young. I wish I had seen past the stories I was told. The wind picked up, swirling a small drift of snow around my feet. I took a folded note from my coat pocket, the letter I had written the day before. Not the polished kind, not the formal kind. Just a page filled with my truth. I read it out loud, not caring that no one else was there to hear me. I told her about Caleb. About Liam. About the times I failed them and the times I tried, silently, the way my father had tried but never learned how to show. I told her about the bitterness I carried for years, the weight of growing up believing she had abandoned us. I told her that I finally understood the other side of the story. That I saw her now not as the villain my father sculpted from his own wounds, but as a woman who loved in a quiet, flawed, human way. And then, softly, I said the words I never imagined would leave my mouth. "I forgive you." The moment I said it, something inside me broke, not painfully, but like a shell cracking open. The wind softened. The air warmed slightly. It felt, for a heartbeat, like the world paused to listen. But forgiveness is a two-edged thing. It frees the one you forgive, yes, but it also frees you. As I stood again, brushing snow from my knees, I felt less alone than I had felt in years. I wasn't just a man visiting the grave of a woman he never met. I was a man reclaiming a part of his story, a part that had been stolen by silence and anger. Now, at last, it belonged to me again. I stayed there longer than I planned, talking softly, letting the frozen lake reflect the pale winter sun across the snow. When I finally returned to the car, I felt lighter, not healed completely, but opened, like a door that had been stuck for decades now swinging freely on its hinges. The drive back felt shorter. As if the road itself had changed, though of course it hadn't. What changed was me. When I walked into my house, Caleb and Liam were waiting. Liam ran to me immediately, wrapping his small arms around my waist. Caleb stepped forward too, not with hesitation, but with intention. He hugged me. We had hugged before, yes, but this one felt different. It carried history. It carried forgiveness. It carried a new beginning. How was it? Caleb asked. Necessary, I said. And right. That night, we had another small meal together. Nothing fancy, just soup, bread, and the warmth of a house no longer filled with hidden things. We talked easily, gently, about the future, about how to honor Margaret's wish to use her inheritance as a bridge and not a wall. And as we spoke, I realized something important. The richest inheritance she left me wasn't in her will. It was in the truth. A truth that freed me. A truth that reconnected me. A truth that reminded me what Christmas is truly about. Not the gifts under the tree. Not the money left in a bank. But the courage to mend what was broken. The courage to forgive what you never thought you could. The courage to love again, even after years of silence. On the next Christmas Eve, when the house was warm and full and the lights of the tree glowed softly in the corner, I placed something at the very top, a small ornament engraved with her name. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder of the bridge she built, even from the other side of life.